Thank you, Marcia. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I think I wouldn't be here if Marcia didn't know that it was my 90th birthday a few months ago. And so she called on me to talk about the meaning of aging. I don't feel very old. But she thinks, I think, if I have any advice to tell you, it's through osmosis, because I learned from my partner of 71 years. So I'm supposed to do two things today: to tell you what I know about aging, make some suggestions, and then afterward to give you some highlights about our 71 years in the Rabbiner. Married 71 years, and we've been in the Rabbiner 71 years. So how can we make the most of our aging years? What can we do to make it a smoother process? Well, I have 5 criteria that I would like to suggest to you. The first is that if you are in relative good health, you've got it made. If you're in relative good health, that's the first step. The fact is that people are living longer today. There's no question about it. Why? What's going on? Well, you all know. We're eating more healthy. We're eating food. We're eating 5 vegetables a day, 5 fruits a day. And at least you do whatever you can. And we read magazines. We subscribe to the Consumer Union Health Bulletin, the Berkeley Health Bulletin, the Harvard Health Bulletin. We all try to keep up. So why are people living longer? Because we eat the right things, first of all. We take the right vitamins, unless they tell us it's too much, we don't need it, or it won't cure cancer or something. We use our good judgment. So we're going to say, first thing is your health, keeping your healthy lifestyle. Now, I want to tell you that people tell us, well, it's in your genes, you're in your 90s. It's not so. My parents died in their early 70s. His mother died at 69 and his father at 78. So it's not in the genes, it's how you live. And that's what we have to do, keep living the right way. Now, secondly, there are advanced medical techniques today that they have. They have pacemakers, defibrillators, stents, bypasses. They do all kinds of things today to keep people alive. I want to tell you that my mother would have been alive today if she had lived, because she died of a faulty heart valve, and we know that could be replaced today. So it's not in the genes. We have medical technology, and now another thing that we have to do is to exercise. You know that. I know that. All you have to do is look in the fitness centers and you see everybody's working out, everybody goes to the fitness center, or they have a treadmill in their home, which they use. Or they do yoga, or they swim, or they bike, or they run, whatever. People are doing exercise, and that's a good thing. That's a very good thing. Now I want to go on to the second criteria for living a good life. It's good if you can be self-supporting. We seniors today in the States are very lucky. We have Social Security, Medicare, Medigap. We're pretty well taken care of. I don't think that's one of our problems here. But if you have enough to keep your needs met, that's really what you need. And if you have a little left over, take a trip to Israel. Okay, so the first one is your health, if you're in relative good health. The second one is if you're self-supporting, And the third one is if you have someone to love. This is very important, very important. If you don't have a husband still living, find a significant other. Or find a friend, or someone whom you can love and who can love you. Or your children, and your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren. Whatever it is, we cannot be alone with ourselves as we get older. We need companionship. We need companionship. Someone who can share our sympathies, our joys, and to help us iron out some of the problems that we had. We have been blessed, as you heard, with 71 years. 71 years, thank God. And that's the next thing I'd like to stress. Gratitude. Express your gratitude. You have blessings. Sometimes I sit in temple and I don't read the prayers, but I say, thank you, God, for all my great-grandchildren and my grandchildren. Now, I just pray in my own way. So gratitude is extremely important. And we do every day. We say thank God when we go to sleep at night. And in the morning we say, Modeh ani lefanecha, melech chai v'kayam, shehechazarta bi nishmati, v'chem rabba. Thank you for bringing me to life. If you're aware of your blessings of living and of everything you have around you and your dear ones, you say thank you. And then what goes along with gratitude? Optimism. If you have an optimistic point of view about everything, life is so much happier as you get older. You see the good in people. And it releases you of stress. Be an optimist. I would like to tell you about a study at the Hebrew Home, which we did. I was there for 15 years as a social worker. I was a geriatric social worker. Now I have only one client. Not an easy one. Our study was this. We took the oldest members who were there, the oldest residents. Some were in their hundreds. Most of them were in their 90s. And we tried to figure out what was it that made them live so long? And we discovered that practically all of them had an optimistic view of life. Life is good. You overlook the shadows and the bumps in the road. And so I think we have to be very, very optimistic. The other thing we found that if you are a grouch, you'll be a grouch later. If you're a pleasant person, you'll be an even more pleasant person. And then, if you have met all of these 5 criteria, you're in relative good health, you have a healthy lifestyle, you have financial support, you have someone to love, you're a positive thinker, you express your gratitude, and you grow intellectually. I didn't bring that up. That's extremely important. Keep learning. Then you have a good start. You will have fewer bumps in the road. You will probably say that there are some good things in aging. So now, I'd like to go back to the other subject that Marcia assigned to us, to tell you some of the highlights of our years in the rabbinate. Well, how did I get into the rabbinate? Well, later by marriage, but the truth is that I was born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio, where they make rabbis. And it isn't unusual for Cincinnati girls to marry Hebrew Union College students. My 2 best friends married Hebrew Union College students, and we married within a week of each other. Now, why? Because the senior class were sent out to other congregations because there was a war going on, and chaplains came from these large congregations. So they had to be filled. So they took the senior class and said, you're going out into the world, the rabbinate. And Joshua was sent to Mobile, Alabama. And he came to my father and he said, you know, I don't want to go out to this town being a single man. It's not healthy. I would like to get married maybe in July or August. This was April. My father said, Josh, we love you, and I think you're a well-suited couple, but Maxine has only 1 year of college behind her. Do you promise that you are going to see to it that she finishes college? He said, absolutely, I'll do my best. I'll do my very best. So we went down, we married, we went down to Mobile, Alabama. We were treated like a royal young couple. They called him the little minister. And we rented a little house in Spring Hill, Alabama. And as I was walking by one day, I saw a sign, Spring Hill College. I said, hey, great. So Josh made an appointment with the dean. And he said, can my wife go here as a student? I promised my father-in-law that she would graduate. And he said, I'm very sorry, but this is a Jesuit school for men only. However, he said, and he turned to me and said, wouldn't you like to be a nurse? I said, no. I got a kick under the table. I said, maybe. He said, we have the nurses from the city coming out by bus to study the sciences. You can study science. I said, great. So I took every science course that you can imagine. And I got some credits. And then I finished up when we moved to Buffalo, where Josh became an assistant rabbi to a wonderful, wonderful Rabbi, Joseph Fink, where he learned everything about the rabbinate. And so in Buffalo, I got my BA there, and I went to social work school too when I got here to Catholic University. I'm really a student of Catholic colleges. I took a course in social work. I got my MA, and I took 4 years instead of the 2-year rapid course because I had duties as a Rabbitzin. And so I had a lot of papers. He had a lot of getting used to me not going every week to services because I had a lot of work. But he did okay. Well, I want to tell you that I enjoyed being a Rebbitzin. Marsha and I have discussed this many times. We're very happy in our roles, aren't we? We just enjoy people. There's so many advantages, and I'll tell you what some of these advantages are. I learned so much from the Scholar Series. If I could get a degree, it would be from all the lectures that I've heard over the years. The Scholar Series is fabulous. We have heard Abba Eban, Viktor Frankl. They were always at the Amram series on Sunday morning, and people came from all over the community. And we entertained the speaker. Now that I think back of it, I was crazy. Every week, I had a luncheon at our home. We always had 12 around the table. There was help, but still. Well, I can only say that was a wonderful experience for me. The Scholar Series was a highlight in my life. Second highlight was 2 sabbaticals that we received. While we were in Trenton for 18 years, we received a sabbatical when our children were ages 3.5 to 14, and we had a wonderful year of experience there. Our children learned so much. They complained bitterly about everything. Debbie had to take 12 courses, and chemistry and physics and Hebrew. She came home and her father helped her out as best he could. They complained, but when we returned from that sabbatical, Debbie said to us, you know, Mom, I don't have much in common with my friends anymore. You know, in Israel, we had different values, and oh boy, it was very much worthwhile. Well, While there, I studied in an old pond. I began more seriously to know Hebrew. And we had a wonderful, wonderful year. Then I was left alone for the first, during the holidays, and he went back for the holidays. And I had to take care of taking the kids to school, the first day of school. That was very hard. I had to go with each one, except Debbie, she was too old for that. That was a toughie. Then the other sabbatical was given by Washington Hebrew. And thanks to Joe Weinberg for taking over Josh. It was wonderful that he did that. He did a beautiful job. And I think he prepared himself for his final senior rabbinate that year. Well, that was really wonderful. We got a sabbatical year. We took a trip abroad. We went around the world for $2,000 in Pan Am. It was a fabulous experience. If we could just, I think it would take a day to talk about everywhere we went. We started in Hawaii, New Zealand, Sri Lanka. We spent a month in India. We went from India, from Srinagar. When we came back, we were supposed to take a flight to Istanbul via Islamabad. When we came back, the travel agent said, I can't send you to Islamabad. That was during '79, during the hostage taking by Iran. I can't send you there. We said, well, how can we get there? He said, you go through Baghdad. So he sent us to Baghdad. What are we going to do? We were scared to death to get on the plane. We were the only Caucasians on the plane. But it was very peaceful. We spent 5 hours in the airport in Baghdad, and then on to Turkey, and then to Israel, where we spent the rest of that sabbatical year. Well, those were my high points. The last one I want to share with you is that I was honored by Rabbi Weinberg when he asked me to give the Layman's Hour address one year, and I regret it. It's about what the elderly can learn, what the young can learn from the elderly. And I think it's a good idea to go back to the Layman's Hour, don't you?
Yes.
On Yom Kippur?
Yes.
Well, I thank God for a full and interesting life with my beloved partner. And I hope that there will be many more experiences. But mine was wonderful. Thank you. I forgot one of the highlights of my life. He was invited to speak at the White House. I forgot the year, but
81.
Richard Nixon did not go to church that year. He had preachers come in and give sermons. So he asked Joshua. And it was quite an honor. And so I asked my daughters who were in college whether they would like to come. Well, it was the year of Vietnam. They both refused to come to show honor to Nixon. And I said to them, yeah, but you're honoring your father. Well, they had boyfriends who agreed with them, and so they did not come. But the two boys, Michael and Danny, did come. They were, what, about 7 and I forgot. Well, they were kids, so they came. They sent a limousine for us. My sister-in-law, Rochelle, came with us, and the two boys, and we were taken to the White House. We were taken upstairs and had breakfast with Pat and Dick. And my dear sister-in-law stayed in the East Room with the two boys. Poor baby. They ran her ragged. They ran around and she was, oh my God, those are antique lamps they're going to play. To this day, she tells us about it. So we were upstairs with Pat and Dick, and Joshua perhaps will tell you what he talked about. But what impressed me so much about Pat Nixon was that after the service, after he spoke, there was a little service by some, here, I'll show you their picture. He spoke, and then there was a receiving line. And someone came up to the receiving line, and I noticed that she had the same dress as Pat. She said, "My dear, I hope I look as lovely in my dress as you look in yours." I never forgot that. That's what I remember. But what did Richard Nixon say to me? He said, "That is such a beautiful necklace. That has to be an antique." And I said, "No, it's just costume jewelry." Here's the picture of my necklace, and standing in line with Nixon. I can even pass it around. There's my supposedly antique necklace. That's it.
What was the fur coat? Fur coat.
Oh, there was a fundraiser after
Yeah, the fur coat. Let's have it.
You can sit.
No, that's okay.
Over here, speaking.
Josh wanted me to have a mink coat for years and years, and I said, no, I don't really want it. So we're in New York, he selected one, and so I had to wear it at one of the inaugurations. I said, I'm going to be the only one. He was giving an inauguration prayer, and I go there, and there were 3 black preachers and a couple of white ones, and they all had mink coats. So I went to, I know what you wanted me to tell. In the newspaper, in the Washington Post, the next day there was a little blurb. There are too many minks in Washington. Because I had gone home with the wrong mink. I went to Ava Poland's house for a reception. And I got home and I see this coat. I said, "This is a schmata. Mine is brand new." So I called up Eva Poland and I told her, she said, "You're the one that took," what was her name? Peters. Roberta Peters.
I was at that party.
We met at the airport and we exchanged coats.
Well, before I say anything at all, I'd like to express my deep respect, in fact, admiration for Marcia, for doing what she's doing all through her life at Washington Hebrew Congregation. She's made our congregation the center of her life and activities. And one of the many things she did, of course, was to inspire the creation of the Empty Nesters. As I look around, I can't believe that you guys are empty nesters. You look young. Anybody here 90 and older? If so, over 90, raise your hand. Nobody. I'm the only one. I'm the oldest. And my baby sister, yes. Well, it's good to see you here. And I must say that talking about aging is not easy. I saw a little poem. As I look in the mirror, I see, and my wondering never ceases, how year after year I receive my cost of living increases. Well, I must say that being older, of course, is a blessing. We say, Shehecheyanu vekimanu. God be blessed and thanks for keeping us alive. But I have ambivalence about the ongoing birthday celebrations in which I celebrate my aging, because with each new birthday, I'm closer to my tombstone. And let's not be unrealistic. The fact of the matter is that we are all going to have to face the end. God willing, your end can be pleasant, more or less, sudden, painless, but that's a hope. What I have to tell you, the first thing about aging is to live each day now, because you don't know whether you'll finish by the evening. You may be finished then, so make the most of each day. Old age has a very bad press. Shakespeare's put it in 8 words. Age, I abhor thee. Youth, I adore you. Keats, the poet, drew a pathetic image of age. An aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick. T.S. Eliot, great poet, mimicked the anxiety of the old. I grow old, I shall wear the bottoms of my trousers rolled. Shall I part my hair behind? Do I dare to eat a peach? In other words, as you get to the latter part of life, everything becomes a question. Dividing a sheet of paper in 2 columns, the positive and the negative.
I'm sorry, Josh, I'm nervous about this. I'm so sorry. Just put up for one second.
It's okay, thank you. Dividing a sheet of paper in 2 columns, positive and negative, it's very easy to fill out the negatives. Now, what positive can one say about getting old? Well, I must say it has been a difficult question for me to answer. But being in that age bracket, 96 going on 97, I had to ask myself, is there anything good, anything worth living for? Well, there are some points I could say represent gains of old age. There's a gain of tranquility. That is to say, you no longer have to prove yourself. You've lived your life, you've accomplished whatever you have accomplished, and you no longer have the desire to outdo anybody else or to outdo yourself. You are not worried anymore about failure. And that's a very important factor in tranquility, not to worry. Secondly, your tensions are reduced because if you are smart enough, you realize in old age that very few things are really important. Most of the things that concern us and that we worry about are really unimportant things. You come right down to it, about 2 or 3 things that are important. Maxine mentioned them. Health, reasonably good health. Secondly, self-support. And thirdly, somebody that you can care deeply about or who cares about you. Number 3, you no longer feel the compulsion of straightening out or correct others. In other words, you accept people the way, thank you very much. See my social worker thing started. You accept people as they are. With faults and shortcomings, you just let it pass. Number 4, you recognize, and that is also a gain, you recognize your limits. Now that's sometimes difficult for people to do. But the fact of the matter is that every one of us is limited in many ways. And you have to recognize those and not push yourself beyond your limits. Let go of some of the responsibilities you can no longer fulfill and disengage. That I strongly recommend. We have often too many commitments. Disengage. Number 5, you gain a certain amount of peace of mind by accepting people, as I said, in situations as they are, in keeping with the song from the Fledermaus. Happy is the one who can forget but cannot be changed anymore. In other words, things are as they are, so stop fighting realities. Live with them. And number 6, I strongly urge you, focus on today, because you don't know whether you'll be here tomorrow. Focus on today. Do what you can as soon as possible. Don't procrastinate, don't delay, don't put off, but do what you want to do and do it fast. That's my first and last suggestion. Now, if there's a little time, I'll be glad to answer questions. Highlights? Well, about my highlights, my career, I can only say that I'm happy to have had a career as a rabbi, still have it. Once a rabbi, you're always a rabbi, whether you serve a congregation or not. But I do want you to know that I decided on the rabbinate against the opposition of both my parents. I came from a very Jewish home, but not an observant home. Mine was not the religiously observant home. And it was only due to the strong influence of an uncle of mine, a rabbi, liberal rabbi from Berlin, who stayed with us in Vienna for a few months on his way to Israel because the Germans expelled him, and he became my tutor. And he introduced me into the Bible, let me learn Hebrew directly as I should have learned in school. I had a miserable religious education, absolutely horrible. And the reason why is because religious education was incorporated in public education. Early primary school and high school, they had rabbis serving in different schools who gave us 2 sessions a week, about an hour and a half, horribly boring and irrelevant, and I was disgusted. Fortunately, my uncle Aryeh was inspiring as a teacher, and at the age of about 17, I told my parents that I want to study Judaism seriously, and in order to do that, I would have to study for the rabbinate. My parents were appalled. They had a good business. They said, but you're the only son, you're going to take over the business. I said, well, I'm not sure I will, but finally we compromised. They said, we'll give you 5 years, go to university, get your doctorate, your PhD, or whatever it is, and then come into business. I said, okay, but secretly, I had no desire whatsoever to remain in Vienna 5 years or to take over a business. I wanted to get out. Out I did, and I'm satisfied I did what I did.
He's too modest to tell you what he did before we left on this sabbatical around the world. But I would like him to tell you.
Well,
Go ahead.
Now you see how this marriage works.
Happy marriage.
This is what always happens. She always tells me what to do.
that's the way it should be.
Yeah. Incidentally, I talked about the miserable religious education I got. I remember reading a comment by Dean Inge of England. He was one of the leading churchmen of Great Britain. And he said, the miracle in religion is that it survives religious education. And most of us have had the misfortune of inadequate religious education,
Not in
which
school, not in
well, let me just finish my point. Which inspired me to make adult Jewish learning the chief object of synagogue and rabbinical teaching, because what we get in the earlier years very often is inadequate. Not that Washington either. I've had some interesting experiences. Oh yes, your question?
Do you have a comment on the changes in anti-Semitism in America through your life, through what it was and what it is?
There's virtually none. As far as I'm concerned, let's not get panicky. There are a few incidents here or there. The fact of the matter is that most people hate somebody. And just about everybody has people around that don't like him or don't like her. Well, well, human beings are nasty, brutish, and we have to accept them as they are, but the fact of the matter is there's not been any moral progress of significance in the last 100,000 years. We are what we are, savages in a way, a little polite on the surface, but we have a long way to go.
Josh, this afternoon we're going to talk about almost anything, any questions you have about what's going on in the world and beyond. But this morning we're trying to deal with the lives, the more personal kinds of things.
Okay, any other question to finalize?
highlights.
You want the highlights?
What about what Maxine asked you to talk
I
about?
had a few interesting experiences. When I was in Mobile, Alabama, and I finished my doctoral thesis, I sent a Western Union telegram to Cincinnati to say, my thesis is finished, I'm forwarding it now, Rabbi Haberman. There was quiet on the other side, and the operator said, Rabbi Haberman, is Rabbi a first name? No, it's not. Then she said, what is it? I said, it's the name of a Jewish clergy. Jewish clergy? What, Jewish? Are you Protestant or Catholic? I learned something. We often exaggerate what we think is anti-Semitism. The fact of the matter is that the majority of Americans don't have the foggiest idea what a Jew is, no more than we think about Mormons. It doesn't bother us that the Mormons are different. We don't ask any questions. The same is true with regard to being Jewish. I had also another interesting experience. When I left Mobile, Alabama, I said, I want my next pulpit to be in the East. And the Hebrew Union College said there's only one opening at that time, and that's in Bradford, Pennsylvania. Bradford? Never heard of it. So I had no choice. I went to Bradford and found out there was a tiny little congregation that was divided between Reform and Conservative and whatnot. So what can I do? I had to stop over in Buffalo at that time. It was close to Bradford. and we were laid over about 8 hours. He said, well, we got to do something in Buffalo. What shall I do? Courtesy call to the leading rabbi congregation there, and that was Rabbi Joseph Fink of Temple Beth Zion. I stopped over at the synagogue and said, I'd like to see Rabbi Fink. The secretary looked at me and said, what for? I said, well, just make a call and so on. A few minutes later, she came back and said, Rabbi Fink will see you. I walked in, Rabbi Fink's study. He looked at me with amazement. He said, you're a young man. I said, yes, I am. And then he said, my secretary is a little deaf. She thought that you were a schnorrer coming around to collect money. But he said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Bradford. He said, you're nuts. Don't go to Bradford. Instead of Bradford, you stay here and be my assistant. And that was a turning point in my career because Beth Zion was a fabulous congregation. Rabbi Fink was a great teacher. I stayed 5 years, and from there went on to Trenton. I must say that being in Buffalo as assistant rabbi, I had some onerous duties, one of which was to attend meetings or gatherings he didn't want to go. And I remember one I'll never forget. I was invited to be the judge in a baby beauty contest. I want to tell you something, that's an experience. They have a huge concert hall there, maybe 1,500 seats, and there were at least 1,000 babies. I walked into that concert hall, and it was deafening. All these babies crying. I'll never forget my duty as a judge in the baby beauty contest. I also had a few unusual experiences, one of which was an invitation to give a eulogy for Joe Louis, the boxing champion. And I asked myself, why would they pick me to give a eulogy for Joe Louis? The answer was that Joe Louis fought Max Schmeling, remember the German champion? And they wanted to find out, those who arranged the funeral, what was the attitude of people in Europe when Joe Louis beat Max Schmeling. And so they asked me to talk about it, and I told the people that we were jubilant. Max Schmeling was knocked out in the first round, and that was an interesting experience. Maxine told you about our visit at the White House, and I could really write a little book about that experience, because Nixon's a very complicated person. Brilliant and unusual in his dealing with people. We had breakfast with him for about an hour or more, and he never stopped talking. I could hardly get a word in. He kept talking and talking and talking. He wanted, I guess, to make an impression, whatever it is. Later on, I stood in the receiving line with him, and all of a sudden he nudged me. He said, the next guy is coming here. He's very rich. He's filthy rich from California. Big Republican donor. And it opened my eyes. Nixon really kind of felt poor. And he had respect for money. He didn't like poor people. He surely didn't like poor Jews. And he did not like poor people. He liked the rich people. And he wanted to be one of them. There were other things that I could mention. The last item I want to mention to you is this. In Europe, the oldest aristocratic family were the Habsburgs. You must have heard about them. They were the rulers of the Austrian Empire. My grandparents were in reverence of the Habsburgs. They had pictures of the emperor, the Habsburg emperor. Many Jewish homes adored the monarchs because they protected the Jews against anti-Semites. And for some reason, I don't know how, there was a reception for one of the Habsburg elders, at which I met the successor to the Emperor Franz Joseph, Otto Habsburg, and his daughter Walpurga, and I took the opportunity and invited her to speak at the Washington Hebrew congregation, and hosted her for lunch. And I thought at that time, my grandparents must be rejoicing in their graves to know that I, a rabbi and a Jew, would host the emperor's daughter in our home. And that was an unusual experience. Well, I think I'm going to close my remarks.
Can you, one question, your transition to the Federation, what that's meant to you in your life, and what you...
Transition to the
Federation of Jewish Studies.
Yeah, that was a most unusual event.
Foundation.
Foundation, yes. One day, I get a telephone call from a member of the congregation. He said he wants to see me for lunch. I said, why? I'd like to make a donation. Okay, it doesn't get too many calls like that. Accepted that. We had lunch, and then he said, could you give me an idea as to what might do the most good? So I said, well, maybe a new bookshelf in our library. He looked at me, he said, no, that's not big enough. I said, what have you got in mind? He said, I'd like to send you a check of $1 million. I said, what? Let me think about it. And I began to think, and I realized that there was a woeful lack of Jewish knowledge among adults. For example, a Nobel candidate by the name of Leder, I think he was a microbiologist, and I had once lunch, and we talked about his work, and I said, do you have any kind of Jewish learning that you studied anyway? He said, I have to confess to you that my knowledge of Judaism is comparable to a third grader in primary school. I was shocked. Later on, I found out that a number of adults in our congregation learned whatever they knew about Judaism through a son or daughter studying for bar mitzvah, but they themselves knew very little. And so I decided this $1 million gift ought to be used for the purpose of creating an organization focusing on adult learning. And when I suggested that, the donor said, there are two things I want you to know. Number one, my gift is anonymous. You must never tell anybody that you got it. Number two, don't ask me to do anything further. Give you the money, do what you want. If you want something for adult education, go ahead and do it. That's how the foundation of Jewish studies started.
So you know about anonymous, oh, I'm sorry.
And all the events that you've seen as a rabbi, is there any point, any event or sermon that particularly stands out in your memory as being truly memorable or important?
Repeat the question, please.
Yeah.
All my sermons were memorable.
You could pay me later.
So you know the whole idea of anonymous, somebody said, I'm giving, or somebody said, $10 by anonymous, and the person stood up and said, I'm anonymous. Obviously that didn't happen in this case. We had an amazing morning. just if I could ask one other thing. Part of what we were going to talk about a little bit is the family of a rabbi, the rabbinic family, and how things work out. So I'll tell you very, very quickly a little story that Joe Weinberg finally got tickets for the Redskin game, something to take Josh and Jonathan to this game. And then found out that unfortunately there was going to be a funeral on this Sunday. And he couldn't break his, he was so upset. How can I tell the boys now that I can't do it? So he decided he would make the funeral a little earlier than he was going to. And he never said a word to me, but he put the boys in the car and off they went. And they went to the cemetery, which was out, in Anacostia, with the boys, who were 8 and 6 or something like that. And he said, all right, boys, stay in the car, and I'm going to be back in not too much time. And he parked a little ways down, and he did the funeral, and he got back in, he took off his jacket, he put on his what do you call it, Redskin sweatshirt, and off they went. And they came home after the game, and I said, how was the game? And the boy said, yeah, it was okay, but you know where we were? So that was our little story. But there got to be times, it was not easy always, where you were, what your responsibilities were, what the children needed. Did they really take to being a rabbi's kid, or was it sometimes really hard for them? Maybe a word or two that either of you would like to say on that.
Well, I'd like to tell you something a little funny. One of our two sons is a rabbi, Orthodox rabbi, but he's a scholar. He doesn't want to serve a congregation, and he's now one of the editors of the Jerusalem Post. He's doing a very fine job in Jerusalem. When he was about 7 or 8 years old, he was part of a carpool, and all the kids in his carpool, there were about 4 other boys, came from Orthodox congregations, and one came from a conservative congregation, and he was a Reform at that time. He was a Reform Jew in a little school, and we asked him, what about the kids in the carpool? He said, I think I'm the only Jew. The others are conservative and Orthodox.
I wanted to ask a question about your children. As having so many, I don't know, is it more than one that have become Orthodox?
No, one.
One.
But he's moderately Orthodox. He does not proselytize.
All his children are Orthodox.
His children, he was very effective in educating his four daughters and one son, and they're all Orthodox, but not fanatics.
So I guess I wonder partly how you cope with him going on a different path than you, and also you're having so many offspring. How do you cope with, the relationship of having
Maxine
so many?
knows the names of birthdays.
She told me once she doesn't,
Let me answer one of the questions. I think our children took very well to being an RK, a rabbi's kid. Yeah, I think they took it in their stride. Their cousins are here, they'll tell you. These two girls told them the facts of life. They were very, very good. Debbie wanted to go out on a date on a Friday night, and so we said, well, if you come to temple first, then you can go out afterward. So they did. The boy came to service and they went after. But that didn't always. Chelsea.
What was it you wanted Josh to tell about before you went to India?
Before we went to India?
I guess it was sabbatical. You said something.
Well, that was setting up the
about
foundation for Jewish studies, possibly,
Yeah.
both education.
Something special there.
Well,
Let me tell you one thing. Debbie married later than Judy. Judy was younger. And so my sister-in-law said, well, what do you want to do? Who do you want to marry? She said, I want to be just like my mom and marry a rabbi. And she did. And she did.
And it worked out very nice.
Yes, they're very happy.
No, they're in New York.
Somebody said, how do we keep up with the big family? We have 15 grandchildren, Baruch Hashem, and we have 20 and a half great-grandchildren. So I have a booklet, and on my 90th birthday, the kids gave me a big party in Israel, and then one here, and one of the grandchildren gave me a very important book. It was a calendar. The Hebrew dates were on one side, and the English dates were on the other, and all of the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, so that helps. But we do keep in close touch.
I'd like to tell you, since we asked about family events, when Debbie was about 15 or 16, a boy called and asked her out on a date. And the boy's name was Antonio something. He was not Jewish. So Debbie felt that maybe there might be a question, and she said, let me just ask my grandmother. She thought of Rochelle, my sister, as a grandmother. And she went back to the phone. She said, I can go out with you on a date, but my grandmother would have to come along. That date never came to pass.
Wow, what a morning we have had. One last question and then.
About your grandmother, you said that she was a big influence in your life. She was very spiritual.
My grandmother was a very pious woman. She lived with us for a few years before her death. She installed her own kitchen. She would not eat the food we served. She was very pious. She prayed very early in the morning, about 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the morning. She started to pray by herself. She had a little stand, and she would pray the morning prayers for maybe at least an hour. I occasionally saw her. At times there would be tears coming down her cheek. And I remember when I was then about 6 or 7 years old that I had a profound impression that she was really in conversation with God. And that was one of my first deeply religious experiences. And I would credit her, at least in part, for my decision to become a rabbi. Yeah.
Rabbi Haberman, in one of your sermons, you told us about a cathedral, a special St. Stephen's, was it? It was near your home
Yeah.
in Vienna, in the Ponce, and you told us that the difference between praying in that cathedral, what it was like to you as an edifice, and as the fact that the intermediary to speak your prayers was so important, that you felt, and also that you felt dwarfed in the grandeur of the Gothic cathedral. And then tell us what you saw in the city.
And then we'll have dinner.
The difference, the comparison.
I could give you a long answer, but I'm going to make it very short. The fact of the matter is the cathedrals are aesthetically very impressive. And particularly when I was a boy and occasionally stopped in a cathedral, it was because of the music, the choral, the grandeur of the structure, very profoundly impressive. However, they have a great defect. A cathedral is a setting in which you cannot have any kind of intimate feeling about God. the personal feeling with God, speaking directly to God, that is a Jewish characteristic, and therefore Judaism is a strong faith, and I think we shouldn't worry about the survival of Judaism. It's going to be there to the end of time.